Hello, I'm Sandra Eileen, and welcome to Healing Forward Support. My goal is to bring you content to validate your feelings and experiences, soothe your soul, and help you find peace and contentment as you navigate your healing and recovery journey. With that said, I am not a therapist or counselor or any kind of medical professional, and none of our content is intended to be medical or therapy advice, and no type of relationship is implied. Please consult with your doctor or therapist regarding anything you learned here that you may want to implement before you make any changes to prescriptions or treatment plans. Any opinions expressed by my guests are their own, and I am not always in agreement. Please let us know of any concerns or questions you have regarding our content by commenting below or emailing us at help@healingforwardsupport.com. Thank you for coming to share with us today, and I am proud to present to you the following content. So here we are. This is our special Easter podcast, thought-provoking, I hope. I'm Sandra Eileen. I'm here with Monica Artrip. Monica Artrip is the technology brains behind Healing Forward Support. Makes the beautiful sound that you hear and the lovely videos that you hear of our podcasts. And we've known each other a long, long time. And Monica's heard me talk about this over the years, and it's taken me a while to fully articulate this concept of how did human Jesus know who he was? And it's over the last month or so, the idea has fully articulated for me. And I just couldn't make this be like a monologue podcast. I needed to have a conversation. So Monica's agreed to participate in my conversation about how did human Jesus know who he was, and what I've learned over the years. And so Monica, what is your answer to that question of how did human Jesus know who he was, based on what you understand of the Jesus story?
I actually didn't know what I thought about this until you articulated it. And I'm trying to remember word for word what you said, but I was like, that is it. That is what people need to hear, is that he didn't know who he was until he pieced it together through his own human experience. And then adding in the divinity, adding in the prophecy, adding in the experience of, that's where it came from. We were talking about Judas 8:2, the saying Judas 8:2, and how adding all these other things in, and Judas 8:2 made Jesus very human, rather than the idea of be like Jesus. Well, how? So
Yes.
I think the way you articulated that was absolutely beautiful. So I'm so excited to talk about this because, we go through life and, we have our own experiences and we hear the story of Jesus, and it just doesn't feel possible or real, or how do I even do that?
Right, right. And for most of us that are raised in any kind of a religious upbringing, we're taught from a very early age that Jesus was God in human form, and Jesus just knew who he was. And, by time he was 12 and his family was going to the Passover celebration, the festival, Passover festival, and he was in the temple with the priests, and people were told to believe that Jesus by then already knew he was God, and he already knew he was going to die for these people, and that he was just walking the kind of just walking through it, knowing what the end was going to be, and he just kind of had to live it. And hey people, this is how you be people, kind of thing. And there was no free will. And
Yeah.
that's the thing that I struggled with since my teens, especially, that there was no free will,
Right.
that he had no choice, is how it's taught to us. That it's there's they made it much more complicated than it needed to be.
Right. That the path was so carved out for him.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. And he
even,
was just handheld and, guided through the experience, and there was no belief requirement on his part.
Right. Right.
And I struggled with that. I struggled with that for years and years. And as I went through my own um, religious experience, especially in my late teens and early 20s, being absorbed into a cult by people that I knew and trusted, that I don't think they realized even what they were involved in, but it was a very high control group. And even though they helped me see more of what Jesus's experience was on earth, they still hung on to the idea that he was God in the flesh and he was experiencing this human experience kind of like from an outsider looking in, like embodied in a human body, but he wasn't really experiencing it. And I really
Mhm.
struggled for a long time with reconciling, how am I supposed to be like that when I don't have those tools?
Right.
And as I go through and went through my own journey of deconstructing and reconstructing my spiritual belief and reconciling how that all intertwines with how I live and how I was raised and how much damage I had to undo with what I was taught, and how much of being told what to believe allowed other things to happen in my life that if critical thinking skills were taught, things may have turned out different. And the whole other complication of, if things had turned out different, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. So it's just the whole, you know, um, coming to terms with who I am and how I got to be here and how does the Jesus story fit in. And it's come articulated for me over, well, years and years. And I think probably about 10 years ago, I came to the realization that Jesus had to figure out who he was. And the Bible makes it clear in the prophecy itself in Isaiah that there was nothing special about this person. Nobody was going to be all like, he's the Messiah, or that person's really special. There was nothing that made him stand out from the rest of his community. There's scriptural indication a couple of times in Luke chapter 2 where it says that Mary kept these things to herself, that Jesus didn't know, at least he wasn't told by the people of his immediate family, his immediate community, who he was. The whole, Jesus, knew who he was in the temple, that he was in the house of his father. It's pretty clear that, as a Jewish tradition, they refer to God as Father. Don't read any more into that than that.
Right.
I mean, what Jesus was demonstrating was typical teenage behavior, that he expected his parents would be able to read his mind. There
Right.
was nothing like extraordinary about this little snippet of Jesus's childhood that is reported in the Bible. I really do believe that Jesus, as he was coming into his late 20s, he was raised the way all the young men in his community were raised, in part of a people that were oppressed by their government, raised in the religion of his family, learned the trade of his family, and came to a time where he had to figure out what he was going to do with his life, like every other person his age.
Right.
Um, and as he continued to look at the scriptures and look at the prophecies that were available to him at the time, people assume and believe that, the Bible as we have it is also the Bible as they had it. Oh, they had the
Mhm.
whole Old Testament. They didn't have the whole entire Old Testament. A lot of it was stories handed down. There were
Right.
scrolls and there were a lot of stories handed down. And he
Mhm.
looked at the history of his family and he started putting stuff together. And he realized that this person in the prophecy, based on what I know, might be me.
Mhm.
He had to come to that realization.
You
And
know, I think like just thinking, you had mentioned that when they went to the Passover festival, he was about 12 years old. I have a 12-year-old. And I'm thinking to myself, if my 12-year-old had to carry the weight of I have to go through all this, there's no way.
right,
There's no way. And
right,
as far as him being raised like all the other men in that time, I don't think it could have been any other way. Because if Mary had been, you know, here's my backstory, you're the son of God, you're the Messiah, you're all these things, how would that have been different? Any other movie, when they're fed that much power from a very young age, it turns out pretty villainous.
yep,
So I don't know that, then the prophecy wouldn't have come true anyways.
right,
So he had to piece all this together. There couldn't have been any other way.
right, right. And that's the super important part of it, is that he had to piece it all together. He had to live that truly human experience, and he had to decide if he believed it.
Yeah.
He had to decide if he believed it, and he had to decide if he believed in it.
Yeah.
And even then, he still had a choice not to follow through with it.
Very true.
So, that's something that's important for all of us. Um, One of the things that I kind of came to a conclusion of over the last year or so is, as I was working through my own relationship with God, and there were years where there was no activity on my end with any kind of relationship with God, that God still had a relationship with me. And in my time, I came to recognize my own relationship with God, and that, he never left. And I think that God would have been patient. You know, it would be ridiculous to think that there was only one human being on the planet at that time that thought that maybe their life matched the prophecy.
Mm,
I don't think there was a whole lot of stoning of pregnant single women during that time frame, because they were looking for that Messiah.
yeah.
There were women, that were right on the edge of marriage who were already pregnant. There was more than one person
Oh, for sure.
that thought they could have been, based on how they understood the prophecy and how they interpreted it for themselves. And so I think God would have been patient. And as long as it took, that's as long as God would have waited for the stuff to make sense to Jesus.
Mm, I like that.
So, um, so yeah, so he had to believe it. He had to believe in it, and he had to have enough faith to walk it. So there's indication in scripture where, people interpret it as, once Jesus was baptized and went through all the testing, and in the wilderness with, Satan testing him, that there was some type of telepathic communication between Jesus and God. And then at that point, he was basically handheld through the rest of his journey. And I don't believe that's accurate.
Mm,
um I don't believe that's accurate. I do believe that the continuation of seeing prophecy be fulfilled in his life was what was the communication. As he continued to live how he thought he should live based on the scriptures and how he understood those scriptures, that he continued to live how he thought he was supposed to live, and seeing prophecy be fulfilled was the communication from God that he was doing the right thing.
I love that.
And as we get um, toward the time of his death, we see Jesus be homeless. We see Jesus rely on his community for support. We we see the persecution. We see the invalidation. We see um, as he's getting closer to his death, I mean, you know, praying while his disciples are sleeping, the total isolation of where he was at and the challenge to his faith. Do I continue to move forward? Do I continue on this path? Because I really didn't think I was going to get killed.
Mm.
And here I am. Do I continue to follow through? And the forgiveness for his disciples and his followers, talking about Judas ate too. That Jesus still loved Judas, still washed his feet, still shared a meal with him, still enveloped him in the group, and kind of gave Judas information to make a different choice.
Mm.
So if Judas made a different choice, how would the prophecy have played out?
Right.
So there was all of that,
Yeah.
and Jesus knew, based on prophecy, based on how he interpreted how things were supposed to play out, that he loved the human, knowing what was coming next.
Yeah. The
And
true definition of turn the other cheek,
mm-hmm,
not allowing more. It's just loving the human.
mm-hmm, loving the human. And even, with Peter denying him 3 times, you're going to deny me 3 times. And Peter was like, no, I'll never deny you. And here are these human beings living through this crisis.
Yes, absolutely.
They taught us how humans are going to behave in a crisis and how to live through this crisis.
How to love through the crisis.
Yes, how to love through the crisis. And, one of the things is that forgiveness is for the person doing the forgiving.
Yes, absolutely.
So Jesus knew, based on prophecy, that this stuff was going to happen, and he forgave them and loved them anyway.
Yeah.
And for Peter, anyway, the life lesson afterwards, the really absorbing and understanding what undeserved kindness means.
Mm.
And that was coming to that articulation that Jesus had to figure out who he was and walk in faith and exercise his free will, was what made the whole Jesus story valid for me.
Yeah.
Because without the free will, to me, the whole Jesus story is invalid. It's quite a story.
I completely agree. I really do. I mean, think about the inner dialogue that had to happen. If there was no free will, there would be no the testing of faith. Like that, you're presented with the heaviest thing in the world. Like we were talking about originally when we decided to do this, there's war going on. You have your friends surrounded with you, and you have this weight of this incredible crisis. Like there was, you know, thing after thing happening for these people. So the inner dialogue, how you were talking about how he lived his life the way he thought it was the best way to live with the best he knew how, and seeing these prophecies coming true, he had to talk to himself the whole time. So that in itself is the pure definition of the free will that we're given. That I completely agree with you that
Mm-hmm.
the story of Jesus and how he already knew who he was, it can't be
Right.
realistic.
Right.
It can't be. And to be able to follow in his path as he preached over and over again, to follow in my path, this is how. We have to
Yep.
see Jesus as the human first. And then that makes it, oh, I, I feel like I could do that.
Yes.
And it's not that far out of reach. It's not outside of my capabilities. I do have those because he did.
Right. Right. And And so by itself, that's a pretty interesting interpretation of how did Jesus know who he was? Well, he had to figure it out. But then it becomes like, so,
Right.
because then when did he know who he was?
Probably when the prophecy was fulfilled, oh, here we are, or
And yeah, so, and that was the final answer to my question, was when did he know who he was? Because of course he went through the death, he went through the resurrection, and then he was still here on earth. And there had to be a question of, why am I still here? What is going
Mm,
on? A shaking of his faith.
right.
In Acts, it talks about how he was on the earth for 40 days. And, different theologians and people are like, we're not sure if that was a literal 40 days or if it was a figurative stretch of time, or, but he was here long enough to make a person question, did I do the right thing?
Sure.
What am I missing? And from my own personal experience, sometimes, that there was an experience I had in my youth, my early teens, that for years and years, for 40 years, I didn't know what the purpose of that experience was. And
Mm,
that's a long time to not know if I was doing the right thing,
sure.
you know? And I didn't realize until I was in the thick of another situation that that's why I went through that. And I kind of, can understand how human Jesus was feeling during that time after the resurrection, before the ascension, of, you know, wait, this isn't going the way I thought it would.
Right.
And so Jesus finally knew who he was at the ascension, when he arrived in heaven
That makes sense.
and saw his faith be fulfilled.
I love it. I love it. And
And
I love how you stated that as well. That not knowing that you're on the right path until it's self-validated through
mhm,
another experience. It's coming full circle.
mhm.
The coming full circles of, oh, that makes complete sense now, is just, it's like up leveling.
Yeah, yeah. And in the time, historically, when Jesus was experiencing all of this, the people that were looking for the Messiah were also looking for immediate relief from their problem of being
Mm,
under Roman rule. Um, so as Jesus was experiencing all this stuff, and there was no relief from Roman rule, that shook a lot of people's faith,
oh, sure.
and kind of have to wonder if it shook Jesus's faith as well. How do I keep going?
Yeah.
Because this isn't turning out the way maybe we thought it should, and so yeah, so the reason why I feel like this is important is because over and over again, year after year after year, we talk about the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and that, praying Jesus into your heart, and, being a follower of Jesus, and if you do this, you'll get this reward. Um, that's not the lesson.
Right.
That's not the lesson. Jesus taught us how to live.
Yeah.
Jesus taught us how to live. He taught us all about relationships. He taught us all about forgiveness.
And how love is the root of it all. Mm,
Yes, that's what's been bugging me for a long time. And in my researching and reading and searching about this stuff, I don't see anybody articulating this.
right.
So I felt like, especially in our time of, we have war going on in Europe, we have a very divided country here in the United States. We have no
Crisis after
relief.
crisis.
Yep.
Yeah.
And understanding and shifting our view of the importance of Jesus's life on earth, and applying the lessons of his life versus trudging through and hoping for the reward of heaven or whatever reward you believe in. Um, there's reward in doing what you know is right.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I really love that in having the reward in living the life of love and of, all the teachings that Jesus gave us. And I kind of have my own opinions on the ascension. I wonder if it's almost like I said, we have the up level when we have the full circle of understanding and then a re-understanding and a relearning and just,
Hmm.
if you think about the spiral of ascension,
Hmm.
you're going up and leveling up. I think, what if? What if that's the heaven is coming to a place of love and peace, no matter what, no matter
Right.
the crisis, no matter, because your faith is so strong in your capabilities, in your, in the higher power, in that everything's going to work out no matter what you're going through.
Right.
Maybe that's the ascension, like a heaven on earth type of deal. So I'm trying not to bring other readings or other things that I've read into this, but it really is a beautiful thing to think about how Jesus was human first
Yes.
in all of this. It's profound.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And I also have had my own questions about the whole ascension process, but taking the Jesus story as it's told
Yes, as it's one.
and just kind of going on with that. You know,
Mhm.
there's all kinds of arguments I've heard over the years as I talk to people about this individually. Well, what about the miracles and what about this? Well, the Bible indicates that miracles were a common thing.
Right.
you know that didn't we do this and raise dead and expel demons and stuff in your name, and he'll say, get away from me, you workers of lawlessness, or whatever translation you read. So yes, so the observation of things that appeared to be miracles was pretty common in that time,
Right.
for whatever reason. Could it be that we didn't understand how things worked? I mean, you can buy a gadget that you put on your table that turns water into wine.
That's true.
you know I mean, is it just that we didn't understand science, or we didn't, who knows? But there was the appearance of miracles, and they were pretty common.
Right.
So, and that by itself lends to the idea that there was more than one person who thought they were the Messiah. So, it's the lesson of living
Yes. That's the most important part.
and exercising free will. you know According to the story that most people share, this took about 3 or so years from baptism to death. you know what if it took longer? Then it took longer. God would have waited.
Right.
you know so yeah, so that's it in a nutshell. And the reframing of this for myself and being able to articulate it has changed my viewpoint about pretty much everything about how I live. That I have this mindset of, my existence is a mission,
I love that.
and that wherever I go, whatever God needs to have done gets done, whether I'm aware of it or not. So there's been a few times where I've like received the feedback of, oh, that couldn't have happened without divine intervention,
Right.
but most of the time I don't get feedback, or I wouldn't recognize it. But I try to live my life in a way that I can be used in whatever way God needs for me to be used, regardless of what I think my purpose is.
Right.
So, and that's what I think Jesus did.
My husband's grandpa has a saying, is that odd or is that God? And just situations where you find yourself in that, you're the perfect person to be there to help,
Hmm.
to facilitate, to have whatever kind of impact you're going to have.
Hmm.
I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, is that odd or is that God? So I think that's beautiful. My
Mm-hmm.
existence as a mission. I love
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yep. Alrighty. Well, we're in Easter season. We just had Palm Sunday last Sunday. This coming Sunday is Easter, and this year the calendar lines up with Passover. So Good
Mm,
Friday and Passover are the same day, which doesn't happen very often. So
I think you're right.
yep,
Doesn't happen very often.
doesn't happen very often. So yeah.
I believe it's a full moon as well, which also doesn't happen very often for
Oh,
all three of those.
no, no. Well, the Passover is in line with the Jewish calendar. So it's usually Easter that kind of floats around wherever it's going to land. Um, but yeah, for all of it to line up. So the Passover and the full moon should be pretty lined up all the time. So, but anyhow, that's what I got. And I appreciate you having this conversation with me because I just couldn't make it be the monologue that I was trying to make. And yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to be honest, we want to keep our services and support to others free, and we need an income to be available to people when they need us. If you have found value in what has been shared today, please consider donating at www.healingforwardsupport.com/donation or www.buymeacoffee.com/healingforward. We have a You Are Not Alone support group every Wednesday at 10 o'clock a.m. Pacific Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Please go to healingforwardsupport.com/workshop to sign up to receive the private link for the support groups each week. We will be using chartable.com to help us reach the full potential of our audience. Be looking for the link to opt out of being tracked in the show notes. And thank you for joining us today.